Hey, welcome to episode 2, Combat Over Coffee podcast. And I'm your host, Mr. Charles. Episode 1 has been up and running as of this recording for a week. And I have to say, I'm very pleased. One of my biggest fears has been deleted and trashed. And that was the sound of my voice. And apparently, it's acceptable. And the positive feedbacks were just excellent. I mean, I was really blown away by some of them, most of them, all of them. And there was no negative, which is good. And I'm just grateful. You know, I think I mentioned in episode 1, I'm not doing this for fame and fortune. Would I like it to be successful with a podcast? Absolutely. But if it's not, it's okay. And I know it's going to take a long, long time to get an interview. I mean, if I was listening to this podcast and I didn't know who Mr. Charles was and you're looking for combat veterans to talk, I wouldn't volunteer. So I understand it. So since the episode 1 was published, I've got the podcast on different platforms now. Obviously, we're on Spotify, but I got it submitted to Pocket Cast, Radio Public, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio Podcast, Amazon Music Podcast. And the only one I didn't submit to was Apple. And quite frankly, they wanted too much personal information. They wanted a credit card impression. They had 4 or 5 other hoops to get it on Apple. Everything just short of a DNA sample. And it might be a rookie mistake, but I'm going to blow off Apple for now. And I'm an Android user anyway, so I'll move on from Apple. I need to give my Instagram username because that's probably the platform I'll use to announce any updates when the next podcast will be available. So if you go to Instagram, and my username is Hopper Fonda 0101. That's HOPPER FONDA, and the 4 numbers 0101. And I also have a Facebook page that I've had for 6 years and never used it. And I think it was at a time when the craze for Facebook was going wild, a few years back. And after I joined, I decided that's something I wasn't interested in. But I know I need to get the word out. I need to be on social media. So I have a Facebook page. So if you go to facebook.com/HopperFonda, HOPPER FONDA, you'll find some things out about Mr. Charles. Now, I haven't given any personal information out yet. And the information I guess I gave on Facebook is pretty minimal, but it's there. So episode 2 is called Obstacles. Now, we all have obstacles in our life, and we seem to work around them one way or another. But in combat, obstacles can mean the difference between life and death. And if you remember the analogy I gave between combat and an onion, with all these layers you have to peel back. And one of the layers that you peel back on combat is obstacles. So when I volunteered for Vietnam, I had 2 years of active service in the United States Navy. And why I volunteered for what I volunteered for is, to this day, beyond me. I come from a non-military family. Hardly anybody all the way down the old DNA tree, served. But after a couple years in the Navy, I read about riverboats in South Vietnam in the Stars and Stripes military newspaper. And it took a while to get the transfer, but I did get it. And because I had not taken any leave in 2 years, they gave me 2 weeks off before I was to report for training. And the unit I was going to is a combat unit, so I had to go through this combat training. So I go home and I see my folks, my mom and dad, and there's all kinds of tears and welcome home. And, it was really, really nice until I told them why I was there and where I was going. And the happy tears from my mom turned to sorrowful tears. She got resentful. She was upset. You stupid boy. And when I look back, I was 19, and I guess I just wasn't very diplomatic the way I told them. I probably just blurted it out. Guess what? I'm going to Vietnam. And I think about it. My mom has passed away years ago, but I still think about her in a positive way. And I know I put her through some hurt. But when you're young like that, I don't think you take it in consideration. So anyway, I ended up in a class of 180 guys. And they initially sent us to Camp Pendleton in Oceanside, California for a couple of weeks of PT, physical training. Now, at age 19, I think the word stud is not appropriate because I wasn't a stud, but I was in good shape. And a couple of weeks with a Marine Corps drill instructor was not a big deal. I got through that with little or no problems. And from there, they sent us to the San Diego desert in the middle of December. And it turned out to be one of the coldest Decembers ever in the San Diego desert. It did well to break 32 degrees in the daytime. It was freezing. And they sent us to a course called SERE, S-E-R-E, which stands for Survival, Evasion, Resist, and Escape. And what it was a mock POW camp out in the middle of nowhere. 8-day course. And their goal was to keep you awake for 24 hours for 8 days. Sleep deprivation. And they played the mind games and they did all this stuff. And it was taught by not only military personnel, but it was also taught by ex-POWs from World War II and Korea. And it was a challenge. Not everybody passed the course. And after 8 days, I was mentally and physically exhausted. And I had made up my mind when I left that course, I will never, ever be a POW. I'd rather be dead than to go what those guys went through. So the course did its job with me. And then from there, they shipped us up to Vallejo, California, to Mare Island, which was a naval base, which is no longer there. And Mare Island was a regular, everyday naval base. It had a club on the property. It had barbershops, places to eat. And we're going to be there about 2 months for riverboat training. And 180 guys spread out over a couple different barracks. And the training consisted of physical training, getting up early in the morning and doing physical training. And then go to breakfast. And then you either did heavy weapons training or you did classroom. And they even had some mock-up riverboats as I recall, there were like canals up by Vallejo, California, and they put us on those little canals, try to replicate the riverboats. And it wasn't until I got to Vallejo that I was told that we were going to be attached to the Mobile Riverine Force, which is a cooperation partnership between the United States Army and the United States Navy to load up combat troops of the 9th Infantry Division and take them into and around the small waterways and canals of the Mekong Delta of Vietnam. And I had no clue. Honest to goodness, I had no clue what I was getting into. So if you had classroom, they broke you into groups of 40, and not everybody went to class on the same days. So we got the schedule for the next day, and I'm in the barracks, and I read on the schedule that I'm in the group of 40. It's got class. And the name of the class was Buddhism. And I looked at Buddhism. What the frick is Buddhism? Well, I've heard of Buddha, but not Buddhism. So anyway, after PT, take showers, go to breakfast, get in uniform, and report to the classroom. It was a nice big classroom. It was modern, had a big chalkboard where the instructor stood in front of. And we're sitting in the class, almost sitting at attention. It's very respectful. It is the military. I mean, there's no grab ass and none of that stuff going on. And the instructor walks in. And he's a naval officer, and he faces the class. And this guy did not introduce himself. And he started off with a question in the class. And he says, by the show of hands, how many in this class right now think that if they're killed in action in Vietnam, they're going to hell? And I want to tell you, I got my attention quickly. And there was this kind of like murmur within the 40 guys, like, what? What's this guy talking about? So I sheepishly looked to my left and looked to my right, see how many hands were going to go up. And sure enough, one by one, hands started to raise, including mine. Now, why, at age 19, do I think I was going to go to hell if I was killed in Vietnam? Now, this goes back to 7th and 8th grade. My parents went to an Episcopalian church, and they didn't go every Sunday. Every Sunday they went, I went, but I also went on my own with my buddy Bob, who I grew up with. And we went to Bible study or Sunday school at this Episcopalian church. And there were boys were separated from the girls. And so this one Sunday, there's, 8 or 9 kids, 7th and 8th graders. And when you're in 7th and 8th grade, you're pretty much brain dead. I mean, you don't think about anything. You're reactionary. You just react to things. And that's what was me. I didn't give thought about anything, but if I heard something, I'd react to it. So the youth pastor walks in, and he's standing in front of us, a little group of boys, and, there's all kinds of commotion going on. And he said, okay, guys, we're going to talk about sex today. Sex in a Bible study. And my ears perked up, and the chatter went to silence. The spitballs stopped flying, and we started listening. So this youth pastor says to us, listen, you guys are getting to that age, 7th and 8th grade, you might be starting to think about sex with a girl. Yeah. And he said, there might be a girl in your class that you have your eye on or goes to your school, and you might be wondering what it'd be like to have intimate relationships with this girl. Yeah. He said, well, I'm here to tell you something. He said, thinking about having sex with a girl is no different than actually doing the sex act with her. It's a sin. And what are the wages of sin? Is death. And you're going to go to hell if you do that. And okay. Well, that statement from that guy stayed with me all through grade school, all through high school. And then I joined the military. And opportunities started to present themselves to me. Lots of opportunities, things that I've never done before or even thought about. There's this culture in the military that I really, really liked, and I participated in that culture. Totally different than being raised at home. So I thought to myself, well, if the penalty is the same as thinking about it and doing it, I'm just going to do it. And I did it. Always in the back of my mind, think I'm going to go to hell for what I'm doing. So that's why I raised my hand. So the instructor continued, and I'm guessing right now, of that 40 guys in that class, probably 30 or 32 or 33 raised their hand. So I wasn't the only guy that raised my hand. So the instructor continued. And he said, the difference between you guys and the guys you're going to face over in Vietnam is they're not afraid to die. In fact, in many cases, they want to die because they've been taught that if you're killed in action, in combat, you will go to paradise or heaven. And not only that, your entire immediate family, when their time comes, will follow you to heaven. So you're doing a great service to your immediate family. I never thought anything like this. It just never crossed my mind. And he said, how do they recruit people in Vietnam, in that part of the world? After all, it's a third world country. Well, it's because they have a caste system there. And these people they recruited to fight in combat are patriotic, but they're also have no future. They're either going to be farmers or laborers. And you're going to see superhuman things happen when you get over there. Because I'm telling you something right now, he says to us, if you get into a heavy firefight and you're ducking for cover, they're not. They're coming at you. And they're going to keep coming, and they're going to keep coming, and they're going to keep coming until they think they can kill you. That stayed with me. So the last thing this guy said in the class is, listen, if you guys think about nothing else or remember anything else about this training you've been through, remember this class. Because the biggest obstacle you're going to find when you get to Vietnam is just what we're talking about. It's a culture. Their culture is different than yours. They think differently than you. And that's going to be a heck of a fight. So that's where the obstacles come in. And it really made me stop and think. And I'm going to be very honest. In the year I was in Vietnam, I witnessed some superhuman things. And I thought of that class and I thought of that guy, that instructor, many, many times because it was dead on. He was dead on. He knew what he was talking about. So the conclusion I came to with my experience was you're fighting two wars in a situation like that. You're fighting the blood and gut combat war, but you're also fighting a culture war. Because he was right. Everybody I was with was afraid to die. Nobody wanted to die. We all had something to look forward to when we got home. And the culture war is tough to win. Very hard to win. So a couple weeks ago, I Googled this because I never Googled it and I was curious. The Vietnamese called it the American War. We're on their turf. And we're in their backyard. We're on their patch. If you killed 20 Viet Cong in a firefight, by that night they would have 40 people to replace them. On the flip side, on these riverboats, crew of 6 or 7 guys, if somebody was killed or wounded and airlifted out, it might take 4 or 5 weeks to replace that person because there were no reserves. There was no bunch of guys sitting on the bench waiting to get into the game when somebody got killed. So what I Googled was how many Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army soldiers were killed in the Vietnam War. And it said 1 million. The American side, approximately 58,000. How many civilians, Vietnamese civilians, were killed in that war? 2 million civilians were killed in that war from both sides. That was from the American and their allies and the Vietnamese communists combined, killing civilians, 2 million people. So they won that war at a huge, huge cost. But again, it goes back to culture. They're willing to sacrifice that many people. They kicked the French out before us, and they kicked us out. And it always just amazed me. So I didn't actually mean for this to be a downer. But honestly, these are the kind of stories I love to hear. It's a part of combat that you're not going to hear anyplace else. And these are the kind of stories I want to bring to my listeners and to me. I want to hear more stories. And again, I'm not stuck on the Vietnam War, but I'm talking from my own personal experience. And I will never, ever on this podcast talk about my personal combat, ever. Because it's personal, and I choose not to talk about it. But this is all part of that layers that peel back from combat. And there's other obstacles in combat besides the culture war. And where these obstacles pop up, you want to have a millisecond to decide what you're going to do because it's not going as planned. And it happens all the time. So that's the story I'm telling tonight. And it goes on all over the world, culture wars. And we just believe differently than what other people believe. So one thing I wanted to ask before I close tonight, and it's almost like begging, I guess, but maybe it's not begging. I don't know. If you really enjoy this podcast and you want to see it continue, like I want to see it continue, if you're busy on social media and you have a big social media footprint, if you could link this podcast to your social media platforms and help me get the word out, it'd be really great. And again, I've turned to my own family, and they were surprised, by the way. They didn't know anything about the podcast. But I got some great texts and emails from family. And they've been very helpful. I got some nieces that go nuts on social media. And they've been very, very sweet with me. And other family members have been very sweet with me. Daughter-in-law, sister-in-law. And they've all put stuff up for me. But it's slow going. And episode 1, like I said earlier, did pretty good. I didn't get 1 billion hits, but I expect it. And I'm going to try really hard here to get an interview or two. So if you can keep interviews in mind, Culture Wars is a great story because I don't think everyone understands it. The other culture war during World War II were the Japanese kamikaze pilots. Google it if you don't know what that is. They gladly ran into ships in their airplanes with just enough gas to get them out there. Same thing. They're doing it for the glory of the country, and they're doing it for a free pass to heaven, along with their immediate family. So it's nothing new with culture wars. Now, I'll take my culture any day of the week over theirs, believe me. I mean, I love my life, and I've had a great life, and all my dreams pretty much have come true, what I've wanted to do in my life. I never dreamed in a million years I'd do the podcast, but technology caught up, and it's been great. And I can honestly tell you, it's helping to fill the void of my friend Lee. Hasn't replaced it. But when I have a chance to talk to great people, great listeners, and I think it's just great. I mean, I'm really, really enjoying it. So I think that's about it for tonight. Episode 3 and 4, I have lined up. There will be, again, personal stories of mine, but they're combat related. And if we peel back a few more layers of combat, that's where I find my stories. It's in those layers of combat. So that's going to wrap it up for tonight. I'm anxious to do episode 3 already. I just burped. And so till I see you again, I'll see you, and go Lions.